Hey everyone, I want to thank you for investing in the Shareholders podcast. I'm Monty, and it's a blessing to be with you guys again. Guys, I have a great show planned. Excited to get this one in. I have a special guest, lawyer to the stars. I am one of those stars as well. Mr. Caleb Green is with me today. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Monty, man. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate it. And I wanted to have someone with a legal expertise, because what we're talking about is a lot of litigation that can be kind of brought forth in this for a good reason. There won't be, but the potential of it is what intrigued me. So if you have not been following maybe the NBA closely, you might not know, but there's been a situation with one of the owners. So there's 30 teams, 30 teams.
Yep, 30. Yep.
And, each team has an owner, a majority owner that's kind of the face. And, these teams cost a lot of money. These teams have been selling for billions of dollars. So usually just can't one person buy a team, but there's usually a group that gets together. But one guy's the majority stakeholder, and he's kind of the face of it and things like that. Michael Jordan is the majority owner in Charlotte. You know what I mean? And there's different ones. The Lakers is Jeannie Buss, and she's, there's other people with it, but you kind of always equate a person. And so, in the franchise in Phoenix, Robert Sarver is the owner, and there had been an investigation to some of his conduct and some things that maybe he had said, and this has been coming for a while, but people were going to wonder what was really going to happen. And so some things came out, and he had done some things that were not conducive to a good working environment. Some racial things were been said by him that had been confirmed. They had done a long investigation. And so what happened was that the NBA ultimately ruled through the commissioner that he was to be suspended for a year, fined $10 million, and kind of go from there. But the players and a lot of people felt that was not enough. They felt like what he had done was over the line, and there was not a place for that. Now, very quickly, I'm just trying to hurry up and recap. Also, you have to understand now the commissioner of the NBA and the commissioner of all sports, they're really hired by the owners to kind of caretake. So the commissioner works for the owner, and the commissioner only has so much power in what is called a CBA, or a collective bargaining agreement. So the commissioner was basically like, this is kind of what I can do. I don't know, but the pressure from fans and the players, and the also key thing is sponsors, is another way that kind of moved Sarver to go. So I want to quickly ask you first, what did you think initially when you heard the first ruling of a year suspension for Sarver based on what he did? Did you even feel like that was enough, that was fair, or did you even just instinctually, how did you feel about that decision?
Yeah, no, it was good. I did have to actually dive in and do some research, look back at the CBA, but also at the NBA has a constitution and bylaws that operate just like an operating agreement would for like a company. Like if you had an LLC, right, you have an operating agreement that basically says, hey, this is how things are going to run, right? Here's how votes are going to go. Here's what happens if we get dissolved or if we get acquired. And so, yeah, when I first heard about it, I immediately thought like this has to be something to do with like at least, some kind of contract or some kind of operative document. And when I dived into it, found I was right. The NBA Constitution and the bylaws provide some provision. But my first reaction was I thought there was precedent here, because if you go back to Donald Sterling, right, we've had this before where we have the commissioner get involved. We have the owners. The owners were debating and ultimately voted him out. But even with regards to, suspensions, I thought that I knew there had to be some kind of governing document whether it was in the Constitution or in the bylaws that the commissioner was actually relying on when he issued out the suspension and the fine for the Suns owner.
Yeah, and again, so for those that don't really know the story, there was a lot of protest about it, and a lot of people were mad. And I think even the public is like, oh, come on, if people love to do this, if that was me and my job and all that. But you have to understand, the CBA collective bargaining agreement is different, and what you sign at your job is not the same as what someone else signs. And so and you brought up another name too. So this is not unprecedented in the NBA. Donald Sterling, a couple of years ago with the Clippers, was on tape saying some racial things, and which I also want to say too, kind of resonated more because you could hear him say the things he said.
He got reported. Yep.
Yeah, and so they ultimately were able to kind of force him out. And I went back and I kind of studied that one too. And honestly, his wife, who he's kind of was estranged from, she actually had him ruled unfit to own the team, which gave her some control, and they were able to give him out. Because here's what I want to kind of get to next is that, Sarver is selling the team, and he's like, okay, fine, I'm out. But legally, it's kind of hard to force someone to give up something that they have ownership of. That's why, we've talked on this podcast before about how important ownership is in the first place. If you were any kind of representation for Mr. Sarver, and let's say he said, you know what, no, I want to fight this, I don't care, I'm out, they're gonna have to drag me out kicking and screaming. Do you feel he could have a case in terms of trying to stay as an owner of the Suns?
Yeah, I think, if I was his legal counsel, I think that he does have a shot. If there's talks or discussions of, trying to get him to sell the team or terminate his ownership interest in the team. Not so much to try to overturn the suspension or the fine. So the NBA Constitution and bylaws gives the commissioner really broad discretion when it comes to issuing out fines and suspensions to owners when they do something that's prejudicial or detrimental to the league. So I think, the fact that they conducted an investigation, I trust that the NBA has done a very good job with this investigation and done their due diligence. I understand that this has been going on for, I believe, over a year. This investigation has been going on for a while. I think in that situation, he wouldn't have, and I wouldn't advise him to try to legally challenge that. He could. But let me back up and kind of give people an understanding of, why does this Constitution and bylaws even have power? But I mentioned before, it's like an operating agreement. Some people are like, if you don't own an LLC or a company, you may not know what that is. But basically, it's like a contract between different owners, if you will. So if I had an LLC and I had partners, right? Let's say you and I owned an LLC, for example, right? And we both own 50%, right? Well, what if we want to make a business decision about, opening up another shop in another state, or about dissolving the company, or about acquiring another company, right? How do we vote on that? Well, that's something that we put in an operating agreement, which is basically an agreement between us about how we're going to operate the business, right? If we disagree, we may say, in that situation, Monty has 51%. So if we disagree, his decision is final. We may want to bring in a third person, right? We may want to add on, a time period for us to discuss. And if we disagree, we wait, have a cooling off period and talk about it again, vote on it again. You may not want it, or we may say, unless we both agree, we won't move forward with it. So it's things like that. When can you dissolve? What percentage do we own? All that gets kind of carved out. And so the NBA operates the same way. The NBA effectively has bylaws, constitution that all the owners assigned to, and it goes through, has a lot of requirements. What it takes for you to be a member, how do you apply, this whole application process, issues with indebtedness. So they think about a lot of these issues ahead of time. So they do give the bylaws and the Constitution give the commissioner really broad discretion to give suspensions and fines. So I don't think we could challenge that. But as far as the team, that's where I think there's some gray area, at least. And this is something I thought we talked about before the show was, I think this is where Donald Sterling probably could have had some arguments, but he ultimately let it go. But so when it comes to terminating ownership interests, the NBA Constitution doesn't give a lot of enumerated reasons why. But and I would say to the Suns owner, if I was his attorney, pretty sure the league is going to rely on the same reasoning they did with Donald Sterling, which is that this was basically your statements were very detrimental to the league, right? It posed very significant harm to the public, to the PR. Like you mentioned before, sponsorships may be on the line. People may want to protest and not attend games, right? That hurts the league as a whole. You're going to reduce in revenue, ticket sales, right? People aren't going to want to associate. People are going to criticize the NBA for not doing enough. The other requirement is that there has to be a significant vote of the owners, right? They have to have 23 of the 30 owners have to vote to terminate, but they also have to have proper bases. And that bases that I just said that this was detrimental isn't enumerated in the Constitution or the bylaws. So what they're relying on, the NBA is relying on a very broad interpretation of this document. And so if I was his counsel, I would say, we may have grounds to fight this, because when you enter into a contract, right, if something's ambiguous, it's not specific, right, you may not be able to justify your actions by relying on this particular document, right? It's no different than we entered into a contract and said, you're going to sell me a car, right? But if I don't put in that contract any specifications about what the car is, right, what model, how many miles does it have on it, is it dinged up at all? Does it have any aesthetic issues, right? Does it have a dent on the side, right? If we don't put that in there and then I come to buy the car for the price we agreed upon, right, I'm going to be frustrated because, while you may give me a piece of junk, right, that doesn't even drive, right, and has ridiculous amount of miles, right, but because we didn't discuss those terms in the agreement, that's on me. So I think when it comes to looking at the Constitution and the bylaws, there's some gray area there about whether or not the league actually has authority, even if the owners vote, to actually terminate his ownership interest in the Suns.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is that part of what's helping him to kind of mosey along is that he's about to make billions of dollars on this deal. You know what I mean? And it's amazing too. I kind of looked at the parameters of it. One of the minority owners really spoke out against him, like he really needs to go and all of that. But I also found interesting, like you say, some of these deals are so exclusive, even in the ownership groups, because apparently, I can't remember the name of that clause, but he can enforce a rule that if he sells, they all have to sell. Everyone that's in his group has to sell. So, and he still gets to determine who's going to buy the team as the majority owner. But what I want to ask you next is this. This is something I've wondered about, because I truly feel that the owners would much prefer, like, just let it go, bro, go, of your own accord. Because I feel like, you got to understand, guys, there's a lot of very rich people out here, but only 30 of them get to say I own a team. It's these teams, most of these people didn't make their money from owning the team. They made it from something else. If the team it's like a vanity thing, it's really cool. You're not just the rich guy that nobody knows. You get to sit courtside. It's a little celebrity with it and stuff like that. They don't want, I feel, to set a precedent to where, because you did X, Y, and Z, you have to leave. Because I feel like all of them could say at some point, man, I don't want that to be me. Now, is that legally, have you seen that to where, all of a sudden there's like a shift and, not that we've changed the law, but all of a sudden it kind of becomes fashionable to execute the law in a certain way? Like, does that happen in legal circles where you see a case, oh man, this actually got ruled in that way, and then all of a sudden other cases kind of start following that? Because I feel like that's what the owners in privacy would tell you, like, I don't want them to really be trying to do to me what they did to him. But does that happen legally at all?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does. And I think the precedent here is a little different than, like, case law precedent where, if a court rules a certain way, especially if it's like a court of appeals or a Supreme Court at the state or the federal level, we see changes because that's going to be binding law in many cases, right? So, and that I've seen it that way. And so lower courts are going to be required to follow if a higher court rules a certain way.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, though, the precedent is important, but it's effectively has a little bit of a different effect. Whereas if someone makes a decision, you're not necessarily bound to that decision. But remember, these teams are members of this organization. So no different than if you and I were members and managers of a business, co-owners of a business. And so we own certain duties, right, to the organization as a whole or the business. And so they don't want to be in a position where they are flip-flopping on decision making, because that can be pointed out as you guys aren't really making your decisions consistently, right? And that can be grounds for some kind of lawsuit, whether it's based upon breach of some kind of fiduciary duty or some other kind of tort. But I would say this, that to your point about the owners not wanting to get involved, again, looking back at Donald Sterling, and this is kind of I look back to the Donald Sterling situation because I think it informs us on what the NBA was thinking then in a very similar and analogous. Now, obviously, Donald Sterling was caught on tape, but here, ultimately, there are some terrible racial things said by both Donald Sterling and the Suns owner. So when we look at that, if you remember, Mark Cuban, owner of the Mavericks, came under fire because when Donald Sterling, Mark Cuban was like, let's not rush into this, because he said, you get into a slippery slope, right? If we go off what, Donald Sterling and the terrible things that he said about, he was mad at Matt, like, don't, shake hands with Magic Johnson. He told the girl he was with that recorded him, don't shake hands with him. I don't like them at the games, all this, this, that, and the third. Mark Cuban was like, that gets us to a slippery slope, because like what statements are okay? Like what statements that are okay today in 10 years might not be okay. And if someone's got me recorded 10 years ago, right, saying X, Y, and Z in a different time, and now someone's got that on recording, then you could use that against someone and force them to sell. It can be a weapon. It can be a way that minority, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that people use necessarily because you did something, but it could be a business tool against someone, right? To get someone to sell a team. So you can buy it. It opens the door, at least in Mark Cuban's opinion, to a lot of backdoor business messiness, if you will, where people can start using that. So I think the owners don't want to get involved. I wouldn't be surprised if, the next time they update the Constitution and bylaws, they enumerate more specifically certain issues. But also, I think the owners will probably look back. The flip side is the owners may not necessarily have as much concern because, one, they've done this before with Donald Sterling, and at least public wise, PR wise, that seemed like that was the right decision. Everyone seemed to agree like Donald Sterling needed to go. And honestly, you look at the Clippers now, they're a much better organization for it too. Under Steve Ballmer. So that seemed to work out. But I think the owners are doing their due diligence because they are cautious. You also want to keep in mind, there may be some sponsors who don't necessarily agree either, right? So that's also something to keep in mind. It's easy to assume that a lot of sponsors, are on the side of, getting rid of the Suns owner. But that may not necessarily be the case. So there's a lot of due diligence to go in there, but I could see the owners being hesitant, just like Mark Cuban was, because again, it's not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. They're really, if they're going to try to force Suns owner to sell, they're really going to be relying on kind of a broader interpretation of the Constitution. And I could see how some owners are a little bit concerned about that.
Yeah, and that was a great point about Mark Cuban. I remember that, and he took some heat. But I remember even at the time kind of saying like, he's not wrong. He's down. But that's why sometimes these leagues and even these organizations, public pressure will make you do things that when you kind of look back, it's funny. when you talk about cancel culture, which if you read Robert Sarver's statement, he kind of alluded to, he's totally unrepentant, really. I mean, he's so far gone, but he kind of blamed cancel culture. Like, it's unfortunate this has to happen because people won't, forgive and all of this stuff. And it's like, okay, bro. But in a way, we do see sometimes where a person gets canceled for X, Y, and Z, but then another person is like, well, wait a minute. Then if you're going to do that for them, are we going to do that for them? And it can be a very slippery slope, for sure. So I want to, and we'll end with this one here. So you brought up something I was thinking about as well, is that these leagues, the NBA is on TV and it's popular because, the NBA finals, millions of people will watch it. You know what I'm saying? And things like that. If I start shooting hoops in my backyard and try to put it out, 5 people are going to watch it. Okay, so we get it. There's popularity. And what brings with popularity, when you get eyes on it, you get sponsors. And, so that's why, Toyota wants to advertise in the commercials. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And we've got another advertisement for Sprite and blah, blah, blah. That's how these people truly get paid. I mean, we talk about the ticket gate and that's fine and all that, but it's really about this TV deal.
Yeah.
The pressure from sponsorships and the pressure from people, because we already heard, I believe PayPal was saying that they were going to pull, I think it was PayPal. I'm sorry, y'all, if I'm messing it up, but they were sponsoring the Phoenix Suns and they were like, if he's still owner, we're going to pull. How much, if you really had to talk in the back rooms, do you feel like that fear, hold on now, are we going to lose money from this situation? Are we going to lose sponsorships, which means the revenue is going to go down? How much do you really feel that weighed into this, more than even the moral, obligation, if you only want to call it like that, but that these owners and the organization and the commissioner felt, do you really feel played into this? If you were, in those back rooms and hearing the deals, let's be honest, how much of it was a worry about, could this guy really affect our bottom line?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely was a significant factor that they considered. Mm-hmm. Just like any business, if something, you're going to be losing dollars that you were getting previously before, mm-hmm. right? And there's no immediate, you have to go out and try to get more sponsorships. So when you do something detrimental like this, or that's considered detrimental either by the public or by sponsors, you also have to keep in mind, so a lot of these sponsorship deals have what we call a morals clause. And so a morals clause is basically, listen, and sometimes they're mutual, sometimes they're one way. But if the person we're sponsoring, whether it be a team or a player or celebrity, a politician, if they do something that is considered prejudicial or detrimental to our brands, right, then we have grounds to terminate the agreement. And that's more than likely, I'm sure all these sponsors have those agreements. Right. Again, because it's something that you contemplate. Think back to Tiger Woods, right? When he got exposed, he was losing all kinds of sponsorships. And people are like, how can you just cancel a contract? You guys agreed. Well, what happens is they have these morals clauses in place. So if you do something crazy, right, these brands have contemplated, look, a team like the Suns owner, for example, or, even if it's a player or some other kind of celebrity you have a sponsorship or endorsement deal with, right? If they do something crazy, right, I don't want to have to be airing, commercials during the game or, with them in it acting. I want to be able to cancel all that stuff. I want to be able to terminate it, because otherwise, if I have to continue and execute this contract out for another, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that's going to be a problem for me, because people aren't going to want to buy my stuff because they now associate this person, with racial statements or whatever it was that they did that was prejudicial. So I think definitely they have, the sponsors have the power of the morals clause, again, to kind of enforce and terminate these agreements. And then even if you could say, well, obviously we don't have these morals clauses in front of us, so we don't have the terms. But even if you wanted to argue, right, that a morals clause is maybe, a little vague, ambiguous, doesn't really say what's prejudicial or detrimental, right? That's not really defined in the contract. even if you want to do, you're still going to find yourself in a bad position, because now you're going to, if you want to enforce this contract, you're going to have to try to litigate. And even then, you may not be able to get what we call specific performance. Courts are rarely going to force someone to do what they agree to in the contract, even if that includes just giving money. But what you can do is, when you litigate a breach of contract claim, you can get damages, right? Which could be the amount of money that they agreed to give you. So you kind of go around that by getting damages. But it's kind of hard for them to force, like, no, we want you to air all these commercials, and honor the TV deals, right? Courts are rarely going to provide what we call an injunction, where they actually force someone to do or stop doing something. So I do think that the sponsors, this is very big. And the morals clauses, honestly, I think people don't really know that those exist in a lot of contracts, in the sports entertainment world, where I work a lot in, that's really standard, because they've seen this happen before. How many times have you seen a celebrity, like use a Tiger Woods, for example, or others, politicians who may have some kind of, side endorsement deal? We saw that with Josh Hawley. He's a senator from Missouri who was, got up in, even after all the January 6th stuff, when they all reconvened, he got back up and he said he was like still fighting, trying to get the election overturned. And I think he had like a book deal with a company, and they canceled it. They were like, nope, we don't want to be associated with you anymore. And they know this stuff, whether it be politics, celebrities, just in the course of, having done agreements through the years and being in the business, they know that there's a possibility that these, whoever we're sponsoring or endorsing can do something crazy, and we want to be able to step away from it, if that happens. And so a lot of people call it cancel culture, but it really just comes back to the nature of the contract. What does the contract say? And does it give you rights to actually kind of terminate the agreement? And again, it goes back to that back and forth, the considerations you want to have in place before you enter into a sponsorship deal with a team, celebrity, or politician.
Yeah, that is some great information. And guys, I hope for you that watch, for those that are entering into these contracts, or if you're building your business up and you want to sponsor, something, and oh man, let's get some, these are things you have to think about, you know what I mean? Because the people that you're going to associate with, the organization or whatever, the celebrity, like you said, the politician, you have to still protect yourself, because it is still about business. Very quickly before we go, I was just talking to someone about this, and we're not going to get into anything of the deep woods of the Deshaun Watson case, but I will tell you this, that was very controversial. Oh my God, whether you think it's true, whatever happened though. I saw the Cleveland Browns play Thursday, packed stadium, and so whatever you think with that case, the Cleveland Browns, at least at the gate, are not losing any money. The NFL ratings are great. So he's going to serve his time, and then he's going to come back, because nothing is truly going to affect the bottom line. And I hate to say it like this, but, an organization like the NFL, my God, these women, and God bless, and, whatever happened, we hope, people get justice served. But the NFL is about making money. They're not about protecting women. They want to protect women, but they don't make any money from that. They're making money from people watching their product. And that's I'm not trying to sound crass at all, but when we wonder, like, how could that happen on it? And I say, go look and see. That stadium is packed. If that stadium was a quarter full and nobody's watching the games, you might see a whole different, situation.
I agree with you. And I think we have to approach, when we look at this, I think a lot of times it's easier for us to get in, and, we're going to protest like we would, and think it's going to have the same effect as if, like, we're talking about some politician that we're voting for. Because in that situation, we are all stakeholders, right? If it's especially if it's someone federal, or someone in your state, right? You're a stakeholder because your vote matters. You can choose not to vote. You can choose to vote for the other party. You can choose to vote for them. So in that situation, there's a lot more pressure on us. But like for me, like for example, I've never been to an NFL game, right? The NFL does not care about me for the most part. They want me to watch the games other than get my eyeballs on the TV. Right. If I'm willing, which let's be real, we saw with the Colin Kaepernick thing, that let's be honest, we really did ourselves, if we were trying to make a statement about, when we were going to view the NFL and give them our dollars, that would have been the time for us to say, I'm not watching NFL. Now, I remember I did for, after the Colin Kaepernick thing, I think for the rest of that season, I remember I said I wasn't watching. I watched highlights, but I didn't watch any games.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, like the next year, people were back in. I knew some people just like it. People went back, and myself included, like went back to watching football, right? And I think that is when the NFL knew they've kind of been through this before, right? We're probably not. Will we take a little bit of a hit? Probably, but are we going to really? Is this really going to affect our bottom line at the end of the day? Again, the NFL is a business. They are about making money. And so the best thing we can do is, if we are stakeholders, is withhold our money, withhold our views from them. But I think, again, the NFL has been through this somewhat before, a little differently with the Colin Kaepernick situation. And now we see it kind of playing a role again with the Deshaun Watson situation. But again, like, I think you bring up a great point. We can't look at this the same way as if, when George Floyd, for example, was murdered, right? The impact of our protesting is going to have a different effect there because for a lot of different reasons. It was COVID. We all had to watch that. It was caught on film. Yeah. But mostly because we're stakeholders in the election process. We can vote in DAs and judges and elected officials who we disagree with. Whereas when it comes to NFL, we have a little, like, while we are maybe stakeholders, there's going to be a lot more of us in certain situations. But also, are we really willing to exercise that? Whereas, you have to vote. That's something you get once every 4 years, maybe once every other year for certain offices. Having the wherewithal to make decisions and protest week after week, Monday nights, Thursday nights, Sundays all day, right? That's different. And so I think the NFL recognizes that, and they bring that in consideration when they're making these decisions.
Excellent point. That really is true. And again, these sports are entertainment. It's just like any other thing. It's just like your Netflix account, and you know what I mean? You love your movies, all that. Like, we're not even gonna get into the gambling aspects, how much money is spent on these games. I mean, what it would take to protest, like you say, every Sunday and every Thursday and every Monday night. For a lot of people, they're just like, we saw, even with the Ray Rice thing, but even back then, and people have totally forgotten about that. That was a big thing. That was on tape.
Oh, yeah.
So, guys, we could talk about this all day, but I really found it to be interesting just with this case, and especially with ownership. Players, coaches, executives is one thing, but when the owner of the team itself is literally going to, these teams don't just go for sale every day. And like I said, they're more such a vanity thing that everybody wants to be able to own a team of any kind of sort. So that was very interesting. But I want to thank my guest, Mr. Caleb Green, today. I know he's very busy, got a lot of things to do. You see him saying he's already abroad, you know what I'm saying? Got meetings, got hands to shake and all that. But guys, Shareholders Podcast, Mighty Sharp Network, you know where to find us at. We appreciate the support. Trying to just bring you some more information, some things you can use, especially with those that are going into business, that are going into franchises, that are trying to start your own thing. These are the other things you got to think about as well, that hopefully we can give you some insight for. So appreciate the time, guys. You know what to do. Stay sharp. Be blessed. Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Appreciate it, E. Thanks for having me.